Okay, in this video I'm going to talk a little bit about these functional theories that Appia gets into in sections 1.7 and 1.8. So first, let's look at this simple theory of pain that's on page 25. The idea here is that this theory says everything that there is to say about pain. Of course it doesn't, but it's ridiculously simple. Okay, so pain is caused by pinpricks. So there's just one thing that causes pain, pinpricks, and then pain itself causes worry and the emission of loud noises. So then pain causes these two other things, and worry in turn causes brow wrinkling. Okay, so that's our theory. Our next step is to fix the way that we write the theory so that it's not circular. That is, so that we're not exactly defining pain in terms of worry and worry in terms of pain. So we replace every reference in the sentence to pain, whether actual or potential, by a letter, and each other distinct mental term by a different letter. So we get X is caused by pinpricks and causes Y, and the emission of loud noises, and Y in turn causes brow wrinkling. Okay, then we have to add this, there exists an X, there exists a Y business, and that makes it what we call a Ramsey sentence. Okay, so there exists an X and there exists a Y, which are such that X is caused by pinpricks and causes Y, and the emission of loud noises, and Y in turn causes brow wrinkling. Okay, so we now have a sentence R that has no mental terms in it. It allows us to say how pain works without relying circularly on knowing what worry is. Okay, but leaving the circular stuff aside, we have our simple theory of pain. Anyone who is in a state that fulfills the role that X has, that X has here is in pain. And X's role is to be caused by pinpricks and to cause these two other things. All right, so that's our theory. Now I want to look at the study questions for sections 7 and 8. So these are online and should have them printed out. On page 2, there's this, well, it starts with this theory about how a car works. So this is not a mental thing, obviously it doesn't have to do with the mind, but it's a functional theory. Not a functional theory of the mind, but a functional theory of how a car runs. But I'm going to skip this right now. Maybe I'll come back to it. But what I want to look at is this example about the alien. And this example picks up from another example that I've used in the classroom. Actually, just to bring you up to speed on the example itself. That's here. And this is for section 1. We were just talking about the stuff regarding whether M has a mind or not. But here's the example, just so you know it. After a long night of square dancing, Bill is walking home through the woods near his family's farm in central Pennsylvania. Off in the distance, he notices a weird glow. As he approaches the glow, he sees a large object in the middle of a clearing. Suddenly, a hatch opens on the object and Suddenly, a hatch on the object swings open. An instant later, a strange-looking creature jumps out. The creature runs over to Bill and, through a series of gestures, indicates that he has to go to the bathroom. Bill points towards the woods. The alien nods and runs into the woods. Okay, so that gets us, if we were going to talk about it, issues about whether this creature has a mind, can it really understand. So that's all section 1 stuff. Back to our example that I do want to focus on here. Okay, I'll let you read this passage yourself. You can read it on the screen, or if you have it printed out, you can read it on the page. Okay, so we want to have a theory of this mental state, troopy. So we create our theory like this. The mental states are in bold, the inputs and the outputs are in italics. That is, the inputs, of course, are sensations and perceptions, and the outputs are behavior. So Graylix is a mental state caused by your boss giving you too much work or by your mother-in-law constantly criticizing everything you do. Graylix causes the person to have trouble sleeping and to drink too much alcohol. If a person experiences Graylix for many days in a row, then the Graylix will cause troopy. When a person is troopy, they close the drapes, stay in bed all day, and never answer the phone. Okay, so again, the idea here is that this says everything that there is to say about troopy. And the point is not to try to match up these Graylix and troopy with mental states that we're familiar with. These are supposed to be new ones. And what we have here says everything there is to say, well, at least about Troopy. Might not say everything there is to say about Greylix, but it does for Troopy. So no one knows what Greylix and Troopy are, so it doesn't help to focus on those terms in order to understand them. Rather, we want to do this to understand what Troopy is. There exists an X and there exists a Y such that X is a mental state caused by your boss giving you too much work or by your mother-in-law constantly criticizing everything you do. And X causes the person to have trouble sleeping and to drink too much alcohol. If a person experiences X for many days in a row, then the X will cause Y, and when a person is Y, they close the drapes, stay in bed all day, and never answer the phone. So that's a Ramsey sentence for our theory of Troopy. The idea is that we are defining these mental states in terms of what they do, what role they have in what's going on in our mind, or in this case, what's going on in the alien's mind. Okay, and then just our story finishes up with, I've got it, Bill says, there are mental states X and Y such that, and everything I just read there, and if this alien has Y, then this alien is Troopy. Bill gives the alien a sympathetic look. Okay, so Bill understands what Troopy is now that he's got this functional theory. So he gives the alien a sympathetic look and says, let's go over to my house and watch Sports Center. All right, happy ending. Now, let's remind ourselves how we got here. We started with Descartes' theory, and so this is going back to page 6. So recall that Descartes said, I knew from this that I was a substance, that is, the mind was a substance, whose whole essence or nature was only to think, and that had no need for any place to exist, and it did not depend on any material thing. So that this I, which is to say my mind, through which I am what I am, is entirely distinct from my body, and even that it is easier to know than my body, and further that even if my body did not exist at all, my mind would not cease to be all that it is. And then Appia says down right below that, so Descartes is a dualist. That means that he believes that the mind and a body are two quite distinct sorts of things, two kinds of what he calls substance. So the body is everything we know in the world is physical substance, and the mind is this non-physical, immaterial substance. Then on the top of page 7, skipping a little bit of stuff, this means that for Descartes, the two essential differences between material things and minds are, 1, that minds think, whereas matter does not, and 2, that material things take up space, whereas minds do not. Descartes' claim then is that what distinguishes the mind from the body is the negative fact that the mind is not in space, and the positive fact that the mind thinks. Okay, so for Descartes, the mind is this immaterial, non-physical substance that thinks and could exist without the body. And so a belief, say, would just be one part of that immaterial mind. So that's a good theory, but it doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. There's the problem that Appia discusses on pages 8 and 9, and then the private language argument in section 1.3 also raises a problem for Descartes' theory. Then next, Appia talks a little bit about behaviorism. Recall for this theory that a belief, for instance, is basically just a type of action. So Appia says, a behaviorist then is someone who believes that to have a mind is to be disposed to behave in certain ways in response to input. On one behaviorist view, for example, for English speakers, to believe that something is red is for them to be disposed to say it is red or to reply with a yes if asked the question, is this red? Okay, but this theory runs into problems also. Appia doesn't discuss it too much, but it's on pages 18 and 19. So here's page 19. Here on 19, he points out that it seems that we are aware of mental states inside our heads, and those mental states should be part of how we explain the mind. But behaviorism isn't able to include mental states that are inside the head. All that it's able to talk about is behavior. So behaviorism isn't really that satisfying. It doesn't get off the ground, and there's some things that it's not able to explain that well. All right, then the next theory that Appia looks at is functionalism, and this currently is thought to be the best theory of the mind. So just to remind you, people who are functionalists about the mind, which is what I shall mean by functionalist from now on, believe that there are similarly two ways of looking at the mind-brain. The neurophysiologist way, which is like the engineers, sees the brain in terms of electrical currents or biochemical reactions. The psychologist way, which is like the programmers, sees the mind in terms of beliefs, thoughts, desires, and other mental states and events. Yet just as there is only one computer with two levels of description, so the functionalist claims there is only one mind-brain with its two levels of description. In fact, just as we can say what electrical events in a computer correspond to its adding numbers, the functionalist can claim that we can find out which brain events correspond which brain events correspond to which thoughts. And then, just right there, functionalism thus leads to monism. Okay, so functionalism is a version of monism. It's not a version of dualism. So the mind is a physical thing, which means that a belief is located somewhere in the brain. But functionalism, kind of despite what Appia is saying here, doesn't really care too much about what's going on inside the brain per se. It cares about the functional role that the mental state has. So, okay, oops. So going back to where we were, functionalism cares about what job or what role, what task the X has here. So X is caused by pinpricks, because you can think of it as, its job is to be caused by pinpricks, and it causes, its role here, its job is to cause Y and the emission of loud noises. So, once we've figured that out, then we've figured out what pain is, this thing that caused by pinpricks and causes these other things. Okay, then on page 27, I picked out one sentence here. For Ramsey's method allows us to define pain in terms of its causes and effects, its functional role. So that's what we care about, what the mental state does, not what it's made out of. And so this theory avoids the problems that Descartes' theory and behaviorism ran into, and it's pretty appealing to be able to accept monism, but still be able to talk about beliefs, desires, emotions, and so forth. And so in philosophy today, we like that our theory of the mind explains those mental states and is still a version of monism, but it doesn't talk about the brain. It doesn't get all involved with neurons and action potentials and so forth. But, of course, there are problems for functionalism as well. Appia discusses one of those in section 1.9, but I'm going to end this here. All right.